Hi, ladies.
Hello, how are you?
Great. How are you both doing?
Good. You can hear us okay, right?
Can hear you perfectly.
Perfect.
So I am going to get us set up into the Facebook group. We are recording, so everything right now will be posted in there. And once we get shared into the group, we will get started.
Okay.
Love the background, Kailey.
Thank you.
Perfect spot.
I know, right?
All right. So it takes a little bit to get active here on live Facebook. So while everyone is tuning in, let us have your patience while we are waiting for this to go live. It's just about ready. We are right on time. All right. Happy Tuesday, team. Welcome to our live training today. Today we have the honor of having two guests, both licensed therapists. We have Kailey and Caitlin from Consider Yourself Counseling in St. Charles. And they're here today to talk with us a little bit about some of the major challenges that their clients, my clients, all of the people in the world are dealing with right now, and trying to navigate through 2020 and the holidays, as well as some signs and symptoms of anxiety, depression, and stress that maybe you don't know that you're dealing with. So thank you so much for being here today, ladies. It's truly a pleasure. And I have to give a little bit short background. Is I worked with Kailey, I think, is it 22 years ago now or 3 years ago now? I couldn't actually figure it out.
Yeah.
But I have to tell you that when Kailey and I were working together, she really helped me through some major life changes. And she was an incredible help and resource for me to have that non-biased opinion really in my life and help me navigate through some of the challenges that I was dealing with. So I like to ask you, ladies, when do you usually have people seek out for your help or guidance? And what is kind of the most common thing that you see in those that you help? And how would someone know if they truly need to see a therapist?
Yes, yes. And I'd like to say thank you for having us here today, too. And that's an excellent place to start. So, there are different warning signs or indicators of anxiety and depression. They can also be broken down into different categories. So there are cognitive warning signs, there's emotional warning signs, behavioral and physical warning signs. So would like to start there just to kind of provide some information on what that would look like. So starting with cognitive warning signs, what to kind of keep an eye out for if it's happening with more frequency or if it's creating more distress. That would kind of be more of the memory problems, difficulty with concentration or focus. You may even start to notice like your decision making or your judgment may be a little bit more skewed too, to where you may be making poor decisions or really not thinking through more of the long-term impacts of your decision making or the impact that that could have. Another key indicator would be an increase in negative thoughts or automatic negative thoughts. So these can be more of like they could race through your mind, they can be focused on more pessimistic thinking. And it can also kind of encompass more of like a consistency or a constant in worrying. So if you're noticing that there's an increase in the amount that you're spending time worrying or going through the what ifs or thinking about the worst case scenarios throughout the day, those can all be and fall under that umbrella of those cognitive warning signs that would go along with anxiety and depression too.
And Kailey really brings up a great starting point. And as she mentioned, there's a couple other areas that we can often, when we know where to look, might see these warning signs. So as she mentioned, another one is some emotional warning signs. And, some examples of this can be, moodiness. And oftentimes, that can be feeling okay, not even necessarily happy and elated, just okay, and then feeling like you're tearful. Your mood is just kind of fluctuating day to day and not knowing why necessarily. going off of that, sometimes we feel really irritable with ourselves, with other people. We notice that we're having a short temper. And going off of that again is sometimes agitation and feeling like we have this like inability to just relax. Whether it's relax cognitively, Kailey mentioned some racing thoughts or anxious thoughts. So, sometimes even relaxing mentally is really hard for us, but also physically, just that inability to feel like you can just feel calm and content. We also really feel overwhelmed when we're anxious or depressed. So that can also be another warning sign. Overwhelmed with the amount of tasks that you have to do on a day-to-day basis. And then a big one, especially one that we've seen an increase in because of COVID and around the holidays, is this sense of loneliness and isolation. And the tricky thing with those two is we often think we can only be lonely if we're physically alone, but a lot of people feel lonely and isolated even when we're around other people, family, friends, coworkers. So it's really not just what you might see in movies where you're by yourself at home. You can really have that sense of loneliness and isolation in a multitude of ways, and as a result of that, you kind of start to feel depressed and that just general unhappiness, kind of going back to maybe what I said earlier with that moodiness and just feeling like not content, like you can't get out of a rut, perhaps. If you have with some of those cognitive warning signs and then emotional, you might realize you're starting to feel restless. And that could be lack of sleep. It could be physical kind of restlessness, and then that inability to focus on a task at hand, whether that's reading, just, morning coffee can become this big task when you're feeling like everything is hard to focus on.
Absolutely.
Awesome. These are all really, really good points. Two things I want to kind of point out that you both said. So one of the things, Kailey, you mentioned for automatic negative thoughts, this is something I hear all the time from my clients. And something that I call them, and totally steal this if you don't use it already, to crush ants. Your automatic negative thoughts is crushing ants. And which, brings us to what are the solutions and ways that you can be able to provide some structure to finding solutions that work for you. And another thing, Caitlin, that you mentioned too before about like the sense of loneliness, or even just feeling as though you're not being heard or understood. And even if you're in an environment and you're with other people, if you're not feeling as though you're being valued or heard as a person, it can often feel like you're the only person in the room, even if you're in a crowd of many. I mean, there's like lots of songs about this too, right?
Yeah, there really are. And you're absolutely right. I mean, it really is just stomping out those ants. So those automatic negative thoughts. And there's definitely a lot of different strategies that can be incredibly helpful for each person with combating those. And the first step that's going to be the most important is really just identifying and creating more of that awareness of when these automatic negative thoughts or these ants are really happening, because they can often go overlooked. Like they can really just become more of the norm for us, where we're really not even noticing that that's what's taking place. So the first step is definitely identification, awareness. And then that's where you can pull in some strategies from cognitive behavioral therapy, which is really helpful with restructuring unhealthy forms of thought. And that is something that's a great resource with being able to work through some of these ants that you're experiencing. Absolutely.
Yep. And actually with the isolation and like you said, being heard, that is a lot of times, as humans, that's kind of one of our main things that we just seek out, is that human connection and that desire to feel like we're being understood and heard. And not always having a solution or a fixer, but again, going back to that, just that connection. And it can be really hard. And so sometimes, and we kind of touch on this a little later, but it's just seeking out those people who you might feel comfortable enough just talking to and kind of showing that vulnerable side of yourself too, which can be incredibly hard to do, depending on who you have in your life. Not everyone has this great support system, and that can be really hard, especially again around the holidays and with COVID. So I think that's definitely a hard thing for people to do, is just wanting to feel heard.
Yes, definitely. So there are physical warning signs too. And I will start with a disclaimer that some of these warning signs of anxiety, depression, there can be some overlap actually with COVID symptoms right now. So you want to make sure you're ruling out anything medical first. But a common symptom or indicator of anxiety is actually aches and pains. And the reason why is when we're experiencing that stress, our body definitely starts to kind of tense up a bit and our muscles definitely start to constrict. So as a result of that, our body can start to experience more of those pains. There's a lot of gastrointestinal symptoms that go along with anxiety too. So early indicators of that, or just symptoms of that, can be diarrhea, they can be constipation and nausea. Dizziness can also be one of those physical early indicators, also with chest pain and a rapid heartbeat. Even when it comes into your immune system. So when you're also going to be experiencing more stress on a consistent basis, it really can lead to our immune system not really operating in the way that it properly or that normally would. So that's where we can even start noticing that like we're getting more colds or feeling more run down on a consistent basis can also be another indicator here.
Yeah, that is an extremely powerful point. Something I talk about a lot with my clients when we're talking about GI issues. Yep. And how powerful, just think about that, how powerful the mind is. Your mind is your most powerful muscle that you have in your body because you think it and a cascade of events happens in your body. Hormones are released, different enzymes and enzymatic reactions occur. There's a whole plethora of things that happen as soon as you think it. So that thought isn't just a thought. That thought is a movement that's happening within your body.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely. And kind of talking and wrapping all of those early warning signs we talked about so far, sometimes the behavioral ones are what we notice or what's brought to our attention by other people because those are most observable. So some behavioral warning signs that we kind of notice and look out for are you eating more or less? Your appetite fluctuates depending on, and that is going to vary person to person. Again, all of this will to some extent, but you might find that you're eating significantly less and losing weight when you're not trying to lose weight. So it's not going on a diet and losing 10 pounds. It's you aren't feeling hungry and you're just not eating. On that side as well, sleeping more or less, like your sleep is drastically going to be kind of affected at times when you're feeling anxious, going back to those racing thoughts. Those feelings of restlessness. So that's really gonna kind of impact as well. We touched on isolation, but behaviorally you do isolate a little bit more when you're feeling anxious and depressed. And it maybe sounds ironic because you think you might actually reach out and seek people when you're feeling that way, but you do, going back to those automatic negative thoughts, you start to have some of those that say like, don't reach out, people don't want to hear what you have to say, or people aren't going to be there for you, or I'm a burden. There's a magnitude of things that we can tell ourselves when we're in that midst of anxiety and depression. So what we do is we isolate and we kind of keep to ourselves. And that it's hard because it makes us, it kind of increases a little bit those symptoms then.
You bring up another really good point too, Caitlin, with your energy levels and just feeling like you're sleeping more and having that exhaustion, just like when we were saying before about what happens when you're physically stressed, emotionally stressed, and the amount of energy it takes for your body, like we talked about, what you think, then becomes a cascade of events, which then requires energy. And when you're not taking as much nutrients from a nutrition standpoint, then your body is actually has less of a chance to fight off from what you were saying before, Kailey, about and from the immune system, but also just to be able to require that sustained energy to maintain higher levels of activity during and throughout your day.
Yes, definitely. And you might also notice that you start to procrastinate more or just completely neglect your responsibilities. So I know Kailey and I were thinking of ways to kind of demonstrate that. And within the group, I've had the pleasure of kind of looking at it the past couple days, and you guys are a great community. And so maybe if meal prepping is something that you've always found that was enjoyable and helpful, and then all of a sudden you notice it's not something that is high on your priority list anymore, you're not just doing it, but enjoying it. That can also be a sign, things that we might overlook as being insignificant can really tell us a lot. When we have all of these symptoms that we're experiencing, at times we can turn to coping mechanisms such as, alcohol, drugs, cigarettes. We either were engaging in that beforehand and we notice an increase, or you've never really been one to partake in that, and you notice that that's the only way you're kind of getting through the day is through some of those coping mechanisms. Also behaviorally, some of these more what we might think of as typical anxiety, nervous habits, but like biting your lip, biting your nails, playing with your hair, there's a lot of, again, warning signs that we sometimes overlook as just being there and being normal, that can really be indicative of you going through something.
Yes, absolutely. And it definitely goes into, though, when we're talking about this and when we're trying to kind of go through and understand, okay, well, when's an appropriate time for me to reach out? Or is it time for me to seek additional support like counseling for the first time or return back to counseling? There's this concept of just knowing that everybody has their own threshold of distress. So what we mean by that is if we're looking at it like on a scale from like 1 to 10, 10 being like our limit, our breaking point, what we're capable of handling, with what we have been having going on for the past 10 months with the pandemic, and then also with the holidays approaching, I'm sure a lot of us have been operating kind of closer to those higher numbers, like at the 7 or at the 8 or at the 9. And we're operating there for maybe days, weeks, months at a time. And the toll that takes on your body, or the toll of operating that fight or flight response, can definitely be depleting mentally, emotionally, physically, cognitively. And when you're at that point where you're at that like 8, 9, 10 number, it's really only going to take that one additional thing that can put you past your point. And that's where they bring in the saying of it's like the straw that broke the camel's back, because it really is. When you're at the 9, you don't have that much room left to be able to cope with additional stressors, to where now you're at your 10 or beyond that 10 limit, and you're in this position where you're overwhelmed and you just don't know what to do anymore. So that is definitely that time where you can look for additional support. You can implement these different coping skills that we'll talk about later, or you can reach out and seek counseling for the first time too. So that is something to kind of get a gauge on when you're kind of thinking to yourself, well, is it time or is it not time? Just to be aware of where your own threshold of distress is really at and monitoring that for yourself.
That was so perfectly said. Just one thing with that. I like how you pointed out, Kailey, because a lot of the times when I'm talking with my clients, we talk about how your individualized plan, you as a person, your world is different than everyone else's. So to compare and say, well, how come that person can be, super mom and she's got her kids and doing this, but I'm over here and I'm like, I can't even handle this one thing. Because you are different than everyone else. Your world of stress and worry is different. Can we build resilience there and help you get stronger? Yes. And that's where some of the strategies that you ladies are going to talk about today are going to come into play. But I just wanted to put a special emphasis on the fact that every person is different, and don't compare yourself to everyone else, because you haven't lived their life and they haven't lived yours. So it's important to also really truly reflect on what your own personal threshold is, so that you're comparing you to you, not you to your best friend.
Absolutely. Took the words right out of my mouth. Perfectly said, Ashley.
I do a little counseling,
That's actually really important too, Ashley, because even if you and your neighbor are both experiencing depression, even within depression, you experience that very differently. So it is not a one size fits all type of experience. And like you both have mentioned, comparing can kind of be the joy of thief, and kind of feed into some of those automatic negative thoughts that you might already be having, of feeling like a failure and other areas. So that is definitely important to note. One of the things that Kailey and I have mentioned and seen in practice a lot recently, again, holidays coming up with COVID, past 10 months being just drastically impacting all of us in different ways, is again isolation. And that is hard, because those are symptoms of the anxiety, the depression, and again COVID. So it's also hard because if you're feeling anxious and depressed, you're not necessarily reaching out to people, but then you have COVID where they're literally telling you don't go out, don't see people. And so you start to feel even more stuck. And and lonely, and then you maybe go see a family member or a friend, and you might have guilt about doing so because you think that you might be endangering yourself or them, and so that it just almost feeds into everything that you were telling yourself prior to that. So as I mentioned before, you start to isolate more, and that is really hard. With the holidays coming up, we always think, oh, okay, let's see family, let's see friends, and the truth with that is putting up boundaries around the holidays in general, but around the holidays is really crucial because family can be toxic, friends can be toxic, coworkers can be toxic. So we don't want to assume that everybody has a support system or family that is conducive to bettering your mental health. So putting up boundaries can be as simple as saying, I'm only going to go to my parents' house for an hour on Christmas, or I'm not going to go at all because I know that if I go, it's not going to be beneficial to me whatsoever. So with isolation, it's kind of trying to do what you feel most comfortable with, given, of course, the circumstances in society right now. Zoom, I know Zoom it doesn't replace face-to-face, but it can be a really excellent alternative if that's what you're more comfortable with. But reaching out to those people that you do feel safe and supported and heard by, so you can have that sense of just again, connection.
Yes,
and those boundaries are really crucial.
Yeah.
Another good point, that you were saying too, Caitlin, is just what people are comfortable doing, because your level of comfort, again, talking about how everyone's different, your level of comfort is different than my level. We've been talking about this within my family too, and even some family members are more comfortable being around us as a unit, and some are just not comfortable with it. And everyone's life experiences and what you're going through at this time is different than what other people are experiencing. So I think it's important to also be sensitive to that and understanding that if they don't feel comfortable, no need to shame or guilt them into coming because they've said that they're not truly comfortable with it. So I always think improvise, adapt, and overcome, and be able to, like you said, use Zoom and ways to connect like this are great methods of being our second best option.
Yep.
And I'm glad you said that, Ashley, because boundaries with yourself of saying no, but boundaries with other people and respecting other people's boundaries. Other people have boundaries that they may be putting in place. And I think you highlighted on that. And that was really crucial because you have to respect other people's boundaries as well, even if you don't agree or understand them.
Yeah, definitely. Another thing we're seeing a lot more of lately too is unrealistic expectations. So definitely around the time of the holidays coming up, in the middle of a pandemic still, and just what we've all, like we said before, what we've all been through this past year, we're seeing unrealistic expectations really play a role into amplifying or kind of creating some more symptoms of anxiety and depression here. So what can really fuel that is really those should statements. So even when we're going back to that same scenario of, okay, well, if you're feeling pressure or if your parents are coming to you and being like, well, we want you to come over for the holidays, you could be placing that pressure on yourself, being like, should go and do that. But if you're going to be operating off of shoulds, then you're operating off of guilt at the same time. And we know too much guilt can definitely lead us to be in positions where we can beat ourselves up, to where we can regret certain behaviors or interactions we're having, and to where we're really getting further away from what actually makes the most sense for us to actually be doing for ourselves in that moment. So we do need to look out for those should statements here when it comes to expectations. And also a big thing right now is with the world we're in right now and with the holidays coming up, our expectations for ourselves on a daily basis they've shifted. So what we were doing this time last year in comparison to what we're doing currently, it may not match up in the same way. So it's even recognizing that we do need to adjust. We do need to adapt. We need to start restructuring and reorganizing the expectations we're setting for ourselves on a daily basis. Because this is where it also brings in that concept of the threshold of distress. If we're going to be operating at those higher numbers, and if we're really at that point to where we're at the 9, we're at the 10, we're really not going to be able to function in the same way as we normally would if we're at a lower number, like at the 2 or the 3. So it's even recognizing when we're hitting those higher numbers, we need to adjust our expectations for ourselves on a daily basis. So we can take the time to recharge. We can take the time to kind of reset. We can take the time to prioritize ourselves, to take care of that threshold of distress we all experience. So then we can get through our day in a manageable way and in an effective way for ourselves. And a big thing that also ties into here along with the shoulds are those perfectionistic expectations. So especially with this time, if we're telling ourselves, well, we should have the same schedule, waking up at 6 o'clock and then getting our workout in, and then making sure we're getting our first meal for the day, and then going to work and performing in an excellent way without making a mistake. It's crucial with our expectations to have leniency and flexibility and to give ourselves some grace here with what we're all kind of experiencing and going on, or what we have going on here.
Mm-hmm. Perfectly said. I was talking about this with our group yesterday for Monday Motivation to Move, and I'm stealing this from someone else. But when you shit on yourself and you shit on others, it gets really smelly. So stop shitting on everybody. And I love that because it just, makes a humoristic situation, humor out of a situation. But it's so true. Those shoulds. Like whenever you hear someone saying those words to you, maybe just take a moment, and maybe they haven't heard a conversation like this where you say, you know what, I appreciate your input right now, but right now I'm not feeling like I should do that. I'm feeling like what I need right now is this, and that's okay.
It is giving yourself permission. Absolutely. Yep.
And that ties in really nicely with some of the coping skills or strategies that we thought would be helpful to share is kind of that self-compassion, that notion that it's okay to be not at that level that you were last year. Kailey talked about unrealistic expectations and having more manageable ones. And part of that is just telling yourself it's okay to get through the day at the level that you did, because at this point we're all essentially surviving day to day. We're in the pandemic. There's so much uncertainty with this that it's very easy to feel anxious and depressed when we don't have an end in sight, and so just the self-compassion can be as simple as saying like, hey, you made it today. Like you got through today, you worked, you took care of your kids, whatever it might be for you in your life, is just giving yourself that grace period of, I did what I could, and that was the best that I could do. And that was enough.
Yep. And that's what even goes into, us being able to have our schedule and routine of what's realistic too. So going into and having that self-compassion, one of adjusting those expectations and then setting up our day to where we're still getting those feelings of accomplishment and productivity, even if they're on a smaller scale. We don't need to go out each day and do everything like full out 100% if we're really not feeling like it, especially with certain symptoms of anxiety or depression that we may be experiencing. So really just recognizing that the small goals for ourselves each day can still produce those feelings of accomplishment and productivity that are so helpful with combating feelings of anxiety and depression and those symptoms that go along with it. So getting that schedule and routine on a consistent basis is crucial as a protective factor for ourselves during a time like this.
Yeah.
Such a good point with, especially when the holiday seasons, when things aren't in your normal routines or patterns. And like you said, it's the balance between, and I have a question too, it's a balance between being able to still have a consistent flow of what you normally do, but then also giving yourself a little freedom and flexibility to say it's not going to be 100% normal, especially compared to other years, but also it's not normal compared to your typical schedule. So it's okay that it's slightly different, but providing you with some of that structure, like if you typically exercise every day, then keep that in your plan. If you typically meal plan in the week, then keep that in your plan to help provide you with some structure during the holiday season so that you're still feeling like you're moving. I always talk about creating maintenance, but you're maintaining this level of like consistency.
Absolutely. And all of you are in a great group with working with Ashley, because a huge coping skill for you right now is exercise and nutrition. If you have that going on a consistent basis, the positive impact that that just has on those behavioral symptoms, cognitive symptoms, emotional, physical, everything, that's huge. And one of the top things that you could be doing for yourself.
Woo! Winning team. Now, my question is, what do you tell someone who says, I just feel so guilty if I don't do all these things on my list? I just can't figure out how to get the guilt to go away.
Yes. Would you like to start, Caitlin?
I was gonna say, I would typically start with why they feel guilty. Like in what way does completing that list bring them a sense of accomplishment? And is there another way that they could perhaps find that sense of accomplishment without being too hard on themselves and maybe pushing themselves past the point that they're able to do in the moment?
Absolutely. And that's where it also, going off of that point, that's where it also ties in too. You could even explore just like a matter of worth there. Like, are you equating your worth as an individual to you completing that list or that task for yourself each day? And if that's the case, how can we build up other areas of worth for yourself outside of that list, so then you can still feel good about yourself at the end of each day without experiencing that guilt there too, if you don't get everything done that thought that you were going to get done for that day.
I also think along those lines too, with that, is going back to the expectations. If you are someone who relies very heavily on other people's expectations or thoughts of you, that guilt of not accomplishing or getting that thing done, or maybe husband wanted this done and he couldn't get it done, or that was just one example, but not being able to live up to those expectations again, is maybe having that conversation, communicating, right? Communication is key to any relationship, but to be able to communicate that, hey, this is just an unrealistic bar that we've set. And I realize that I'm living off of your expectations and I'm not creating my own, to the point where what truly matters to me most.
Very well said. Yeah, absolutely.
And I like that you brought that up, because a lot of people sometimes feel like these have to be things that they do on the sly or without kind of talking about it. But you can, sit down and have that conversation with your partner or your whoever it might be, and say, like, I'm feeling like I'm burnt out and I need to adjust my expectations. Here's how I'm going to do it. Here's how I feel like you can help me. What do you think? It is a collaborative experience. It's not just kind of doing it all yourself and expecting people to know that you're doing it, or so the communication, like you said, is key, and being just upfront about it can really make a difference as well.
Absolutely. It can be. And that's where it kind of goes into too. If you are feeling like you want to reach out for help, reach out for help. And if you're even deciding, if you're feeling like, oh, well, should I not, you can even just do like a little bit of like inventory or data collecting here. And if you just kind of want to keep track of how you're feeling on a day-to-day basis, and even just kind of writing down some of these like warning signs or indicators of anxiety and depression we went through, just to keep track, that is a great place to start, because that starts the process of just self-reflection. It starts the process of insight development. And if you're recognizing, yeah, you know what? I'm feeling actually that this is something that's constant for me, and I've been noticing this has becoming more of a pattern, it's more of a frequency, or it's consuming me, then that's where you can transition into just reaching out for help. And it doesn't need to be counseling right off the bat. It could be talking to your family, talking to your friends, talking to coworkers, talking to this group that you guys have set up as a support system for one another. And if you are considering the idea of counseling, you can even go in with taking some pressure off of yourself, of just being like, okay, well, I'm just going to go in for an initial session and just see how I feel. I don't need to go in and commit to something just long term at this point, or for whatever amount of sessions. I'm just going to go in and I'm just going to feel it out. You can even just take that initial step too. But it really just is, reach out for help. We all need each other right now in order to continue to get through what the pandemic has been doing, and also the holidays too, right?
Yes, that was so well said too, because again, you may be of the and I hear this a lot, is like fear of reaching out for help and fear of asking a professional to be able to guide them through, or like you're saying, even talking to a family member. Sometimes I can feel, yes, that can help to talk to friends and family, but when you have a true non-biased opinion, you have someone to really bounce off. And my husband and I, we differ a little bit in our beliefs in this necessarily, but I just feel like there's so much to be said. There's so much benefit on talking with someone who doesn't live in your world, because they can help pull you out of it. When someone is in your space and part of your world, it just is a little bit more challenging to see beyond.
Yeah, it does.
So I highly, highly, highly recommend, if you are right now in the process of navigating through whether or not you do experience anxiety or you do experience depression, or you're really trying to figure out, wow, this has really brought to surface, like I am experiencing this on a regular basis, I do need help. I highly recommend reaching out to consider self-counseling. I mean, it was really life-changing for me. It changed, and I won't go into my whole spiel, but it really was a great experience, Kailey. And I just have to thank you for the experience that I had with you, and would love to learn a little bit more about how people can get in touch, reach out, and what that would look like in terms of.
So you can definitely go to our website, and it has, like, if you need to email to initiate making the appointment, you can call. Courtney is our new client scheduler, so she's really great at setting each person up with the appropriate clinician based on their schedule, what you're coming in for. We do use a lot of different theories in our practice. Each therapist kind of has their own approach, but a lot of the big ones that we use are cognitive behavioral therapy, dialectical behavior therapy, and solution focus. And really our main goal, especially in that first session, is to help the client realize that, we're going to give you something to work with and something to take away from that first session. That it is very scary sometimes coming in, spilling your guts and answering all these questions that we ask, but it really is a collaborative approach. And it's me and Kailey, or our coworkers with the client, working with them to establish a treatment plan that is appropriate to them, because each person is coming to therapy with a different issue or a different goal with therapy. No one, again, is coming in at that same point necessarily. So we tailor the therapy approach and the treatment plan to them in particular. And that can fluctuate along the way depending on the needs of the client. That's, again, not set in stone. So that is a little bit about how, as a whole, how we go about it, but also, with Courtney scheduling it, going back to that, she sets that up, she takes your insurance information, and then Lisa, who is our billing coordinator, she actually runs and verifies your insurance and the benefits. And we do accept most major insurances. There's a list on our website too, if you'd like to check it out. And it does kind of, again, detail each insurance that we are part of.
Absolutely. And with the coordination too, when it comes into customizing treatment, I mean, we work well, and we have the experience of even coordinating with primary care physicians and doing coordination of care with doctors. We will even pull in family members when appropriate to just to get a whole dynamic going that would give that client the most benefit and the most gain out of what they are looking for from counseling and just treatment in of itself too.
Awesome. Thank you, ladies, so much. One more point to that too, and I know maybe there might be a couple more things that we want to talk about in terms of questions. We do have a couple of people that are live right now. So if you ladies have any questions, we've got Courtney, Neha, Lori, and Janet that are live right now. So if you ladies have any questions and we haven't quite answered them yet, feel free to post in this when I post this in our group, and then Caitlin is in our group too, and I'll tag you in it so she can message you back and forth and just kind of make that connection. Another thing that I just wanted to say too before about reaching out and kind of alleviating that pressure from that initial meeting. Sometimes I hear people say, well, I don't know how I feel about talking to a stranger. Like, how are they, they don't know me. I don't know if I'm gonna like them. And you said before, Caitlin, too, that all of you have your different personalities, obviously, but all of you have your different way that you work with clients specifically. Is there, and I remember doing this with you, Kailey, with our first session, is we had like two, Yvonne and you, sitting in on the session and then talking through exactly what I really wanted to work on myself. And then we decided that it was the best fit to move forward together. So is that still something that you guys do as a team, or has things changed since you and I worked together?
Yes. So what we are currently doing is during the initial scheduling, we have our client coordinator just do some screening with particular questions. And then based off of that, we determine as a team for who would be the best fit for that new client coming in. Now, we do all have similar styles to some extent. Obviously, there's some differences with how each of us work, but generally, we all operate off of the same modalities. We all operate off of similar approaches. So you're still getting a good kind of focus or concentration as a whole within our practice with our style, but there are some differences between each of us and within the varying clinicians. So yes, our client coordinator will provide or just ask some screening questions to make sure that you're getting fit with the appropriate counselor for you, and then just taking it from there. And always too, with counseling, it's about finding the right fit with the counselor. So even if you start out with a counselor and you realize, yeah, you know what, I'm not really feeling that type of connection I'm looking for, or I don't really think it's the best fit, that's okay. So if you're feeling like you need to seek out a different counselor, or if you're feeling like you need to talk about that with your counselor and see what other options can look like, that's totally appropriate. And it's just about finding the best fit for yourself. It really is, because that's how you're going to get the most out of a counseling experience, when you have that connection with that counselor.
I love that too. It just sounds so non-intimidating, right? You think like, well, if this person doesn't work for me, you can have that conversation with that person saying, even though it might be a tad awkward, you say, you know what, I'm wondering if there might be a better fit for me. Or talking with, you said Courtney is your coordinator. So talking with her to be able to say, hey, you know what, I am feeling like I need this from that person, and I'm, I'm seeking that type of connection. That is important, because when you're really truly getting to those deeper levels, you're peeling those onion layers back. It's important to be able to feel like you can be yourself and you can say the things that you want. And I'll be perfectly honest with you. I went and saw 2 people before I came to you, Kailey, and I was like, oh no, that is not the right fit for me. This woman was like telling me all about her certifications, and I was like, okay, can we talk about me? Like, this is why I'm here. So it really, truly is important that you do find the best fit for you, and that, again, knowing that that you have a wide variety of therapists within to consider yourself counseling, it gives people a lot of options and have variety. So any last thoughts that you ladies like to share with our team here, or anything else that you feel like would provide some insight before we conclude?
I think one thing that we wanted to touch on real quick is just, progress is not linear. So if you do seek out a counselor or a friend or whatever, and you're given skills, there's going to be ups and downs. There's going to be trial and error. And it's okay if one day you feel like you're rocking it, and the next day you're like, oh man, like I didn't use that coping skill and I'm not feeling my best. It doesn't mean you're back at where you were when you initiated the process. It just means that you're learning. And that's really all that anyone can do in life, is just learn and try and work with what's best for them. So again, just remembering that, it's not linear, and having that self-compassion in those moments where you really need it, and might be really easy to not give it, but that's a crucial indicator that you might need it the most, and just give that to yourself.
Agreed. Awesome. Very well said.
Awesome. 2 more quick questions for you ladies here from our live group. Are you seeing people in person or over the phone right now, virtually?
So we are doing a combination of both. So we are still doing telehealth session. So that can be on a video format, or that can be a phone call. We are also doing in-person sessions too. We have a protocol when you do come in, and we do ask the screening questions for COVID. We take your temperature before you come back. We ask that you wear a mask, and then we make sure that we're distanced enough within our offices then too, and we're disinfecting after each session as well. So we are doing a portion as well with in-person sessions at this point.
Great. And then the last question here, do you accept Medicare?
We do not accept Medicare. So with us not accepting Medicare, we have the option of a self-pay, to where there would be a sliding scale rate. And that would be something to where we would not be billing through insurance, that you would be able to address with our coordinator and our admin, either Courtney or Lisa, and to kind of discuss what payment could look like then if we're not going to be going through insurance.
Got it. Awesome. Well, ladies, thank you so much for being here. Team, if you have any other questions for either Kailey or Caitlin, you can post them within this post. I will also make the link, or we'll put the link of your website, and then any other information that you'd like me to post, just send it over my way and I'll get that set up. And you guys can all reach out and get in touch and then get your questions answered, get the help that you need, especially right now, especially during the holidays, and especially in a time where we all need to come together and help each other out as a unit. Thank you, ladies, so much. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. You too. Bye.